Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Imagine a vast, frozen wasteland where ancient creatures, once human, now roam the icy depths. As the team uncovers the ruins, the spirits awaken, hungry for vengeance. But the chilling truth, what lies beneath the ice isn't just the remnants of a lost civilization. It's a trap waiting to claim them all. Will anyone make it out alive? Stay with us until the end for the shocking twist you won't see coming. Don't forget to hit subscribe to support Whispers in the Dark and keep the stories of terror coming your way. Jonas Wells had never been one to struggle with silence. Years in the U.S. Army had taught him to embrace solitude, whether it was in the scorching desert heat of Iraq or the stifling darkness of Afghanistan's cave systems. Silence, for him, had become a constant companion, one he had grown to know and accept. But now, back in the civilian world, that silence felt suffocating. It pressed in on him from all sides as he wandered aimlessly through his small apartment in Anchorage, Alaska. The years of military service that once seemed to define him had slipped away like sand through his fingers, and all that remained was an uncomfortable emptiness. Jonas had tried to fill the void. He'd taken odd jobs, spent hours in the gym, even tried to dive into the latest tech craze that flooded the civilian world. But nothing stuck. The adrenaline of combat had left him addicted to the rush, and here, in this small, quiet town, he was an outsider, a man out of place. It was on one particularly cold morning in late November, the kind where even the air felt heavy with frost, that he received the call that would change everything. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize flashing across the screen. Jonas hesitated before answering. There was something about the unknown number that sparked a strange sense of unease within him, but curiosity won out. Jonas Wells. A voice, smooth and professional, echoed from the other end. "This is Colonel Grayson. We need your help." Jonas froze. The name sent a shiver down his spine, not because of fear, but because of the familiar ring it had. Grayson. The same man who had given him orders, directives that had led him to some of the most dangerous places on Earth. "I'm retired," Jonas muttered, his voice rough from months of disuse. "I don't work for the military anymore." "I know," Grayson replied, his tone never wavering. "But this isn't about the military. We've been monitoring your career, and your skills are exactly what we need. We have an operation in Alaska, and we want you on our team." Jonah's heart began to beat faster. Alaska, he had spent so many years in the frozen landscapes of foreign lands that the thought of returning to a similar environment both unnerved and intrigued him. "We've detected something beneath the ice. A heat signature. Something ancient," Grayson continued, his voice growing more serious. "We need someone with your experience, your ability to handle extreme conditions. You'll be working with an elite team of specialists. You'll be the key to solving this mystery." The words hung in the air, a silent invitation, one that Jonas could not ignore. "What exactly are we talking about here?" he asked, his curiosity now fully piqued. Grayson paused, as if carefully choosing his words. "Something was buried beneath the ice thousands of years ago. We don't know what it is, but we need to find out. We've selected you for your unique qualifications. And the best part, Wells, there's a lot more than just ice beneath that frozen wasteland." Jonas stared out the window, his eyes scanning the darkening skies, the wind howling outside. Something about this mission felt wrong, like a shadow looming just beyond the edge of his awareness. Yet, he could not bring himself to decline. This was the purpose he had been searching for, the challenge he had been waiting for. The call from the deep had found him. "All right," he said finally, the decision already made. "I'm in. What's the plan?" "You'll be briefed when you arrive," Grayson answered, his voice clipped and businesslike. "Pack your things. We'll send someone to pick you up. Your flight is already arranged." And just like that, Jonas was swept back into a world he thought he had left behind. But this time, it wasn't war he was returning to. It was something far more unsettling, something ancient, lurking beneath the surface of the world. Jonas stood at the edge of the Arctic research base, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The snow beneath his boots crunched with each step, the isolation of this place more palpable than he could have imagined. He had expected cold, yes, but the oppressive stillness, the sheer desolation of this place was something else entirely. The base itself was a sprawling complex, tucked away in the middle of nowhere, with little more than a few reinforced buildings standing against the wild, freezing winds. There were no signs of life outside the main compound, no light save for the pale glow of the base's few scattered windows. As Jonas made his way toward the entrance, a strange feeling washed over him, a sensation that seemed to claw at the back of his mind. He shook it off, telling himself it was just nerves, but the feeling lingered like a shadow that refused to dissipate. Inside, he was met by a man in a thick parka, his face hidden behind dark goggles. The man gave a terse nod. "You must be Wells," he said, his voice muffled by the cold. "I'm Davis. Colonel Grayson is waiting for you." Jonas followed Davis through the cold, sterile hallways of the research facility. The walls were bare, the air cold and dry. The place felt like a prison, as if it was designed to keep the world out, both physically and mentally. The lack of personal touches, the sterile, military feel, only deepened the eerie silence. Finally, they arrived at a small briefing room where several other members of the team were already assembled. They were all dressed in heavy-duty expedition gear, their faces worn, their eyes sharp. A woman stood near the table, flipping through a set of papers. She glanced up as Jonas entered, her eyes assessing him in an instant. "Jonas Wells," she said, her voice low. "I'm Dr. Parker. This is our team. We've been waiting for you." Grayson, a tall, imposing figure in a dark uniform, stood at the head of the room. His eyes met Jonas as he walked in, and without saying a word, he gestured for Jonas to sit. "We're here because we've found something buried beneath the ice," Grayson began, his tone grim. "The heat signature we detected doesn't match anything we've ever seen before. We believe it's a remnant of a civilization, but the exact nature of it, well, that's why you're here." Jonah's brow furrowed. "A civilization?" he asked, incredulous. "You mean under the ice?" "Yes," Grayson replied. "Something has been preserved down there for thousands of years, and now it's time to find out what it is." There was a pause, a deep silence hanging in the air. Jonas looked around at the other team members, their faces tense, their eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. They all knew that this mission was not just about exploration. It was about uncovering a truth that had been buried for far too long. "And what exactly are we looking for?" Jonas asked. Grayson's lips twitched into something like a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're looking for answers and maybe something more." The words echoed in Jonah's mind as he sat back in his chair, staring at the projections on the wall, a map of the region, pinpointing the location of the heat signature. "Tomorrow we go down into the cave system," Grayson continued. "Your mission is to investigate the source of the anomaly and retrieve any data we can. But remember," he said, his tone darkening, "whatever is down there, it's been buried for a reason." Jonas nodded, his mind racing. As Grayson spoke, something deep inside him stirred, a feeling he couldn't ignore. The ice, the cold, the isolation, it all felt too familiar. And yet there was something else, something older, something waiting. That night, as Jonas lay in his quarters, the silence of the base pressed in on him. He tried to sleep, but the cold seeped through his bones, and the whispers in the wind outside seemed to beckon him. A chill ran down his spine, and for the first time in years, Jonas felt truly afraid. He had answered the call, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that something was calling back. And it wasn't human. The descent was unlike anything Jonas had ever experienced before. The wind outside howled against the research base, an eerie, almost mournful sound, but inside, the cavernous expanse of the cave system swallowed every noise, every whisper. The team, clad in heavy thermals and headlamps, moved forward, each step echoing in the vast emptiness. As they ventured deeper into the frozen belly of the earth, the oppressive silence was broken only by the crunch of snow beneath their boots and the occasional rasp of breath. The air was thin, colder than it had any right to be, even in the Arctic. At the head of the line, Colonel Grayson led the way, his steps sure and deliberate. Behind him, Jonas followed, a faint unease creeping into the back of his mind. Despite the pristine, untouched beauty of the subterranean landscape, something felt wrong, something old, something unnatural. The darkness seemed to press in on them as they descended, the walls of the tunnel slick with ice, the air growing thicker and colder the deeper they went. After what felt like hours of trudging through the claustrophobic tunnels, they finally arrived at a wide chamber. The team stopped, their lights sweeping over the space, revealing a sight that would haunt Jonas for the rest of his days. It was a ruin, vast and sprawling, its architecture a maddening blend of the familiar and the incomprehensible. The stone structures stood in unnatural symmetry, their surfaces smooth as glass, yet carved with intricate patterns that seemed to dance and shift when the light touched them. The walls were covered in symbols, some of which Jonas couldn't even begin to comprehend, their meaning lost to time and decay. The architecture was disturbingly perfect, too perfect. The precision of the angles, the way the stones fit together, was beyond any human craftsmanship. This can't be real, Doctor, Parker muttered, her voice tinged with awe and fear. The team had stopped dead in their tracks, their eyes wide as they scanned the ruins. There were no signs of modern tools, no evidence that any human civilization had ever existed here. This place felt ancient, older than anything Jonas could have imagined. Jonas could feel his pulse quicken. He knew enough about the Arctic wilderness to understand that nothing this big, this elaborate, could have remained hidden for so long without reason. And there it was, buried beneath the ice, a reminder that the world they lived in was not the only one that had ever existed. A sudden thought, unbidden, terrifying, flashed in his mind. What if some things are meant to stay buried? The team ventured deeper into the structure, their lights flickering over strange, weathered altars, shallow pits filled with something dark and viscous that seemed to resist the light, clinging to the stone like an ancient stain. The walls themselves appeared to weep with age, as if the very stones were alive, breathing with the weight of the past. Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The air felt heavy with an unspoken presence, as if the ruins were watching, listening, waiting for something or someone. It wasn't long before they discovered the first horrifying clue. In the center of what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber, Dr. Parker crouched beside an altar, her flashlight catching on a set of jagged, rusted implements. Tools, perhaps, but too distorted, too sharp. Her fingers trembled as she brushed away the dirt and grime, revealing the artifacts beneath. Grotesque figurines carved from bone and what appeared to be pieces of ancient, decayed fabric stained with dark, rust-colored marks. She recoiled, wiping her hands against her suit in disgust. "Blood," she whispered hoarsely. This is blood." Jonas stepped forward, his stomach churning. The bloodstains seemed fresh, as if they had been left behind by a ritual performed only days before. The symbols etched into the stone were not random. They were deliberate, crafted with care, each one more disturbing than the last. The deeper they delved, the more grotesque the discovery became. In one corner, partially obscured by crumbling stone, Jonas found what appeared to be a series of human-shaped bones, their remains twisted into unnatural positions, as if they had been contorted in agony before being discarded in haste. "This is a sacrificial site," Jonas said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder would somehow make the horrors more real. "They were worshipping something." "They still are," Grayson replied grimly, his eyes scanning the dark recesses of the chamber. "Whatever this place is, it's not just a ruin, it's a tomb." As Jonas turned to face the rest of the team, the temperature in the room seemed to drop, the air thickening with an invisible weight. His breath hung in the air like smoke. The silence was oppressive, heavy with the realization that they were not alone in this place. The walls seemed to pulse with an unseen presence. One by one, the team members began to notice it, whispers barely audible, just on the edge of hearing. They turned to each other, unease spreading across their faces. "We need to leave," Dr. Parker said, her voice quivering. "Now." But before anyone could move, a sound broke the silence, a low, guttural groan that reverberated through the stone. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the earth settling. It was something else, something far worse. The team froze, staring into the darkness, their flashlights darting over the walls, but there was nothing there. Then the shadows moved. Jonas blinked, his heart racing. At first, he thought it was just his eyes playing tricks on him, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls, stretching and twisting as though alive. But when he looked again, they were gone. And yet, the feeling of being watched remained. As they turned to leave, the air seemed to grow heavier, colder. It was as if the very atmosphere of the ruin had thickened, pressing in on them. Then, without warning, one of the team members, Sergeant Riley, let out a scream, a sound so piercing it echoed through the ruins. His body jerked violently, as if something unseen had gripped him by the throat. Jonas rushed toward him, his heart hammering, but by the time he reached Riley's side, the man had collapsed to the ground, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. "Riley!" Jonas shouted, shaking him, but there was no response. The man was unconscious, but his body was shaking, his skin clammy, as if he had seen something that had shattered his mind. "We have to get out of here," Jonas said urgently. He didn't know if Riley's state was caused by fear, the cold, or something far darker. The ruins were no longer a place of wonder, they had become a place of terror. The team began to backtrack through the winding corridors, their footsteps hurried, echoing in the silence. But as they moved, the whispers grew louder, closer. There was no escape. It was as though the ruins themselves had come alive, pulling them deeper, urging them to stay, to witness the horrors that had once been hidden away. When Jonas glanced back at the walls, he could swear he saw faint symbols glow from beneath the layers of ice and stone, etched into his own skin as if the ruins had claimed him as one of their own. Something was watching them, something old, something hungry, and it was waiting for the right moment to make its move. The team was no longer alone. The realization hit Jonas like a slap to the face. The ruins weren't just a grave, they were a prison. A prison that had held something far worse than death, something far darker than they could ever have imagined. And whatever it was calling to them, urging them to uncover its secrets, to awaken it once again. As Jonas hurried to catch up with the team, his heart raced, and his mind reeled with the terrible truth. They had been drawn here for a reason, and they were never meant to leave. The deeper they descended into the heart of the ruins, the heavier the air grew. The walls seemed to press inward, as if the very stone of the ancient civilization was alive, holding its breath. Every step Jonas took felt like a violation, a disruption of something older than time itself. The whispers had not ceased. They had only grown louder, more insistent, tugging at the edges of his mind, crawling under his skin like an unseen infection. The team pressed on, though their movements were slow, deliberate, each of them now feeling the weight of their isolation. The once vast and open chamber they had entered now seemed to close in around them. The darkness had thickened, the light from their torches flickering against the oppressive blackness. There was something wrong about this place. Jonas felt it, the unease creeping along his spine, the skin at the back of his neck prickling with the awareness of unseen eyes watching him. The floor was uneven, cracked stone beneath their boots, and the walls were covered with strange symbols, symbols that seemed to shimmer and shift with the light, as if they were never meant to be fully understood. At the far end of the chamber, something caught Jonah's eye, a glint of something metallic buried deep beneath the ruins. He motioned for the others to follow, and they made their way toward the strange object, curiosity pushing them forward. As they approached, Jonas saw it, a sarcophagus of sorts, its surface covered in dark carvings, its edges ornate but worn with age. The stone was cracked, its ancient seals broken as though time itself had made an attempt to open it. "Do you think this could be another burial site?" Dr. Parker asked, her voice a whisper, as though speaking louder would somehow disturb the air around them. Jonas didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the sarcophagus, a growing sense of dread clutching at his chest. There was something about it that felt wrong. The markings on the stone didn't resemble anything they had seen before. They were intricate, elaborate, and yet they had an unnatural quality, something not of this world. As they neared, Jonas felt the ground shift beneath him. It wasn't the stone. It was a tremor, soft at first, then growing stronger. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, as if the earth itself was awakening from some long, deep sleep. The temperature in the room dropped sharply, and Jonas could see his breath in the air. It wasn't just cold. It was the kind of cold that bit at the soul, the kind that left a lingering sense of dread. Then, with a sound that seemed to come from deep within the stone itself, the sarcophagus shifted. The lid moved, slowly at first, as if resisting the force that tried to open it. Then it gave way with a soft creak, revealing the contents within. Inside, the team found what could only be described as a nightmare. Mummified corpses, hundreds of them. Their bodies were perfectly preserved in a grotesque state of decay, as though they had been waiting for someone, for something to disturb their rest. Their skin, though brittle, was remarkably intact, and their faces, though twisted with ancient pain, were still hauntingly human. The eyes of the mummies were wide open, their gazes fixed, staring into nothing. But it wasn't nothing they saw. Jonas could feel it, they were watching. His heart raced, and a strange pressure built up in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but it felt as though the corpses had been waiting for this moment, for the intruders who would come to disturb their slumber. They're not just mummies, Jonas muttered, his voice thick with dread. These aren't just ancient remains, Before he could finish, the ground beneath them trembled once more, stronger this time, more forceful. The team jumped back as one of the mummies, a figure draped in tattered robes, shifted. Its body jerked unnaturally as though it were no longer bound to the laws of the living. Then, as if waking from a centuries-long slumber, its mouth opened and a low, guttural moan escaped, an agonized sound that sent a chill through Jonah's bones. "Get back!" Grayson shouted, his voice sharp with panic as he grabbed Dr. Parker's arm, pulling her away from the sarcophagus. But it was too late. The mummified corpses began to stir, one by one. Jonas watched in horror as the mummies' decayed limbs twitched, their ancient bodies jerking to life. They weren't moving in the slow, deliberate way a corpse might, but with a terrifying violence, their limbs flailing, their bodies stiff and unnaturally contorted. The air was thick with the scent of decay, but there was something else in the air too, something that made Jonah's stomach churn. A hunger, a palpable desire for something, someone. Then the whispers began. They were soft at first, barely audible, like the wind itself speaking in a language no human had ever heard. But then it grew louder, more insistent. The words twisted in Jonah's mind, their meaning slipping just beyond his reach, until they settled into one horrifying phrase: "Feed us." The mummies, once revered as gods, were not just lifeless remains. They were vessels for something else, something more sinister. The ancient souls within them stirred, trapped for centuries, now awakened and hungry. They weren't just asking for blood. They were demanding it. Panic spread like wildfire through the team. "They're alive," Riley yelled, backing away from the sarcophagus. "Get out, we need to get out." Jonas was frozen, his body locked in place as he watched the bodies of the ancient beings writhe and twist in their tomb. Their skin cracked and split, revealing bones that had been warped by centuries of entrapment. But their eyes, those eyes, were not blind. They were wide, staring, as if beckoning Jonas to join them in their torment. And then the attack came. The first of the mummies lunged at Riley, its decayed hand gripping his shoulder with unnatural strength. Riley screamed, but the sound was cut off as the mummified hand clamped over his mouth, pulling him back toward the sarcophagus. Another of the corpses reached out, grasping at Dr. Parker's legs, its fingers scraping across her protective suit with a chilling screech. Jonas didn't think, he reacted. He drew his weapon, his hand shaking as he pointed it at the closest mummy. But the moment he fired, the creature jerked back, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. A deep, guttural growl escaped its throat as the bullet ricocheted off its chest. Jonah's mind raced, his instincts screaming at him that guns wouldn't stop these things. Nothing would. In the chaos, the room seemed to shift. The walls seemed to close in, the temperature plummeting further, as if the very air itself was pulling them into the depths. The team scattered, trying to escape the grasp of the undead creatures, but it was as if the room itself had come alive, shifting, twisting, creating new paths to trap them. Jonas could hear the whispers growing louder now, clearer, each one an invitation to madness. "Join us, join us, join us." The world around him began to blur. The line between reality and nightmare had shattered, and Jonas couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. He could hear the whispers inside his own head now, feel them crawling along his skin, inside his bones, urging him to succumb, to join them. He could feel the weight of the ancient souls, bound to the ruins for eternity, drawing him in. But it wasn't just the spirits that haunted him. It was the terrifying realization that their hunger, their need for the living was insatiable. And now, they would stop at nothing to claim more souls. Jonas was no longer fighting to escape the ruins. He was fighting to keep his mind from unraveling, to hold onto the fragile thread of reality before the curse of the forgotten souls consumed him completely. The mummies were not just the dead. They were the remnants of an ancient evil, trapped for millennia, now free to feast once more. And as Jonas stumbled through the shifting maze of the ruins, he couldn't help but wonder how long he and the others had before the curse claimed them too. The air in the depths of the ruin had thickened to a suffocating density, wrapping itself around Jonas like a second skin. It was the kind of cold that seemed to seep into the very marrow of his bones, turning every breath into a rasping struggle, every step a battle against the crushing weight of isolation. The whispers had stopped, but in their absence, something far worse had taken hold. Jonas had learned quickly that silence in a place like this was far more dangerous than noise. The deeper they ventured into the labyrinth of tunnels, the more it felt as if the ruin itself was alive, breathing with a malevolent purpose. The walls pressed in on them, the stones slick with a cold sweat that wasn't natural. The faintest light from their torches flickered uneasily, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and curl, as though something unseen was moving just beyond their reach. "This isn't right," Riley muttered from behind Jonas. His voice was hoarse, the terror clear in his eyes as he glanced nervously at the walls. "We shouldn't be here." Jonas didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all felt it, the overwhelming sense that they were being watched, followed, hunted by something far older and far more malevolent than anything they could have imagined. The further they descended, the more the air seemed to crackle with an electric tension, the cold biting deeper, crawling under their skin. It wasn't just the physical cold. It was something else, something primal that clawed at their minds. As they rounded a corner, the darkness ahead shifted. A low growl vibrated through the stone, sending a jolt of pure terror racing through Jonah's veins. He didn't have time to react. A massive shape lunged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a feral hunger that could only belong to something born of nightmares. The beast was colossal, easily 10 feet tall, its body a grotesque hybrid of man and creature. Its face was distorted, elongated with jagged, animalistic features, a mouth full of sharp teeth that could easily tear through bone. Its limbs were twisted, muscles bulging and knotted, like a malformed statue brought to life. It stood on 2 legs, but its arms were far longer, reaching nearly to the ground, ending in clawed hands that scraped along the stone floor with a chilling screech. Before anyone could react, it lunged. Its claws scraped across the ground, faster than Jonas could process, its massive body moving with unnatural speed. The creature's mouth opened wide, and Riley screamed, his cry cut off as the beast slammed into him, knocking him against the cold, unforgiving stone of the tunnel. Jonas's instincts kicked in, but his body was frozen, gripped by a terror so deep, so primal, that he could barely lift his rifle. Dr. Parker was the first to react, firing blindly into the creature's massive chest. But the bullets didn't seem to faze it. The monster howled in pain, but it was an angry, guttural sound, almost a call to arms. Its eyes locked onto Dr. Parker, and in an instant it moved again, faster than anything human had the right to be. The team scattered, running down the tunnels, the sound of the creature's pursuit echoing behind them. But Jonas knew. There was no escaping this thing. It wasn't just hunting them, it was toying with them. It was like a game to it, a cruel game where the hunters were now the hunted. As Jonas and the others fled through the narrow tunnels, the labyrinth of the ruins seemed to shift. Every corner they turned, every path they tried to take was blocked by more of the creatures, more of the monsters that had once been human. They were everywhere now, emerging from the shadows, their grotesque forms lumbering toward the team, driven by an insatiable hunger. "We need to stick together," Jonas shouted over the chaos, trying to maintain some semblance of order. But the fear was taking over. His voice trembled, just like the hands that gripped his rifle. His thoughts spun wildly, fighting against the overwhelming fear that threatened to swallow him whole. It was no longer just a battle for survival against the creatures. It was a battle to keep his team from falling apart. Paranoia had begun to settle in as the whispers of fear spread from one member of the team to the next. They were all suspect now. Who could they trust? Jonas glanced over his shoulder at Dr. Parker, who was stumbling behind him, her eyes wide with terror. She wasn't looking at him, though. She was looking over his shoulder, her gaze locked on something just behind him, something that he couldn't see. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, but before she could make a sound, the shadowy form of another beast erupted from the darkness, dragging her away before anyone could react. "No!" Riley shouted, turning back, but it was already too late. Dr. Parker was gone. Jonah's heart pounded in his chest as they continued to run, but the tunnels were closing in on them. There was no escape, no way out. The beasts were relentless, hunting them with terrifying precision, their monstrous forms cutting them off at every turn. One by one, his team was being picked off, consumed by the twisted creatures they had unwittingly unleashed. As the tunnels began to twist and narrow, Jonas realized the horrifying truth. They weren't just trapped in the ruins, they were being herded. The creatures weren't attacking at random. They were guiding them somewhere, and Jonas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being lured towards something far worse than anything they had encountered so far. The air grew colder. The shadows deepened. Every step they took was accompanied by the sound of their own breathing, harsh and panicked, echoing against the stone walls. And then in the distance, Jonas saw it. A chamber, its size impossible to comprehend. The walls were covered in grotesque markings, symbols twisted into intricate patterns, resembling some kind of unholy language. The ceiling stretched up impossibly high, filled with the remnants of ancient tapestries, long decayed, fluttering in the freezing air. At the center of the room stood a massive altar, and on it blood, old, dried, but still visible, still staining the stone. It was the source. The monsters weren't just guarding the ruins. They were guarding something much more sinister, something far darker. Jonas stumbled to a halt, his heart stopping in his chest. The altar was the epicenter of the curse, the dark ritual that had bound these creatures to the ruins. But there was something else there, something that sent a chill of terror crawling down his spine. Beneath the altar, embedded in the stone, was a massive, pulsating core, glowing with a faint, unnatural light. It was the source of the creature's power, the heart of the ruin, and they were feeding off it. Every kill, every moment of fear was feeding the curse. It was feeding the monsters. It was feeding the ruins. Jonas knew what had to be done, but he also knew that it would cost him everything. There was no escaping this. The creatures were too powerful, the ruins too ancient. He and the remaining survivors were doomed, caught in a cycle that had lasted for centuries, a cycle of bloodshed and terror. With no choice but to move forward, Jonas led the team deeper into the chamber, but the creatures were right behind them. There was no escape, no plan. just the overwhelming knowledge that they were about to be consumed by the very horrors they had come to uncover. And as Jonas looked around at the faces of his remaining team members, fear and terror reflected in their eyes, he realized the most terrifying truth of all. They had already lost. The full moon hung low in the sky, its sickly glow casting an eerie pall over the ruins. It seemed to pulse, throbbing with an unnatural rhythm, like the heart of some malevolent being buried beneath the ice. As the cold wind howled through the narrow tunnels, Jonas could feel the weight of the night pressing down on him, heavier than the darkness itself. He had come to this forsaken place to uncover the truth, to explore the secrets buried beneath centuries of ice and stone. But what they had found, what they had awakened, was beyond anything he could have imagined. The team stood together in the heart of the ancient chamber, their faces pale in the moonlight, eyes wide with terror and confusion. The altar before them was no longer just a relic of the past. It was a gateway, a door to something far worse than the monsters they had been fighting. As Jonas stared at the altar, his mind reeled with the revelation. It had always been about the ritual. The creatures, the mummies, the spirits, they were all bound to it. And the full moon, the blood moon, had awakened the final stage of the ancient curse. Is this what it was all for? Doctor, Parker whispered, her voice trembling as she gazed at the altar. All these sacrifices, all this bloodshed, for this? Jonas didn't answer. He couldn't. The words were stuck in his throat. They had been lured here, played like pawns in an ancient game they had never been meant to understand. The ruins, the creatures, the twisted, mummified bodies, they were not random acts of terror. They were part of a larger design, a design that had been set in motion millennia ago. And now, with the full moon in the sky, the final act was about to unfold. The symbols on the altar began to glow with a faint, otherworldly light, their shapes twisting and shifting in ways that defied logic. It was as if the stone itself had come alive, pulsing with a dark energy, the remnants of a civilization far beyond human comprehension. The very air in the chamber seemed to vibrate, resonating with an ancient power that sent a shiver down Jonah's spine. The ritual, Grayson said, his voice low and filled with awe, it's not just to summon the spirits, it's to open a portal to another dimension, another realm, one that has been sealed for centuries. Jonas turned sharply toward Grayson, his heart pounding in his chest. What are you saying? You knew about this. You knew what was happening here all along. Grayson didn't answer immediately. His eyes flickered toward the glowing altar, his jaw tightening as he stepped closer to it. This is what we've been after. This is why we came here. The power to manipulate the creatures, to harness the spirits. It's what we've been preparing for. The words hit Jonas like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. His mind raced, a swirl of confusion and disbelief flooding him. Grayson, the man he had trusted, the man who had led them through this nightmare, he had been playing them all along. This wasn't just a scientific expedition. This wasn't a quest for knowledge. This was a mission to exploit the ancient powers of the ruins, to use the creatures, the spirits, for military gain. No, Jonas muttered, shaking his head. This isn't what we came for. But it was too late. As the full moon reached its apex, the ritual began to unfold before their eyes. The ground trembled beneath them, the air thickening with a palpable energy. A low, rumbling sound filled the chamber, rising in intensity, vibrating through the stone like an earthquake. The altar began to crack open, the symbols glowing brighter, hotter, as if they were alive, tearing at the fabric of reality itself. Then came the voices. At first they were faint, barely audible, like the whisper of wind through the ice. But as the ritual progressed, they grew louder, clearer. The spirits trapped within the mummified bodies were calling out, their voices distorted, twisted with a hunger that made Jonah's blood run cold. "Help us!" The voices cried, their words full of anguish, full of a terrible, eternal hunger. "Free us!" Jonas took a step back, his chest tightening with dread. The spirits weren't asking for help. They weren't pleading, they were demanding. The ritual was not just about opening a portal. It was about breaking the seal, unleashing whatever lay beyond the dimensions, the horrors that had been waiting, imprisoned for centuries. And then, as if the very earth itself had been torn apart, the beasts appeared. Massive shapes, twisted and malformed, emerged from the shadows of the altar, their forms so grotesque, so impossibly large that Jonas thought for a moment his mind might snap under the weight of what he was seeing. They were half human, half beast, their bodies covered in patches of decaying flesh, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Their mouths opened in sickening, guttural howls, their claws scraping against the stone as they moved toward the team. Jonas felt the ground beneath him shift, as if the very ruins were responding to the creatures, bending to their will. The walls closed in, the tunnels narrowing, trapping them in this ancient chamber. The beasts were no longer just guardians of the ruins. They were the harbingers of the destruction to come, the servants of the ritual, and the only thing standing between Jonas and the final stage of the portal. As the team scrambled to react, Jonah's thoughts raced. They were trapped. There was no escape, no way to survive. The beasts were closing in, their grotesque bodies moving with terrifying speed. Their glowing eyes locked onto the team, their predatory instincts sensing weakness, sensing fear, and they would not stop until every living soul was consumed. But then something unexpected happened. One of the team members, Riley, stepped forward, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. But his gaze was not fixed on the creatures. It was fixed on Grayson. "You're one of them," Riley said, his voice trembling with disbelief and betrayal. "All this time, you've been working for them, you've been planning this, using us just like the rest of them." Grayson's expression twisted, but there was no guilt in his eyes, only cold calculation. "It was always about the power, Riley," he said, his voice steady, almost disinterested. "This is the opportunity of a lifetime. You never understood. None of you did." Before anyone could respond, Grayson made his move. He reached into his pack, pulling out a device that hummed with energy. It was the key to completing the ritual, the final piece of the puzzle. He stepped toward the altar, the device crackling with dark power. "Stop!" Jonas yelled, his heart pounding in his chest. "Grayson, what are you doing? You can't open that portal. We have no idea what it will do." But Grayson was beyond reasoning. His eyes were wild now, burning with the madness of his ambition. "It's too late," he hissed, pressing the device into the altar's core. "The portal is opening. We're going to control them, control everything." The air around them began to warp and distort as the first cracks in reality appeared, the portal swirling open like a gaping wound. The creatures howled in anticipation, their bodies quivering with eagerness. The spirits screamed, their voices rising in a cacophony of anguish. Jonas realized with a sickening clarity that he had no choice. The creatures would not stop. The portal would not close. He was caught in a game of manipulation, of betrayal, and now of survival. And the only way to stop the madness, to prevent the world from being consumed by the horrors of this ancient dimension, was to join forces with the very creatures he had been running from. "Do it, Jonas," a voice whispered in his mind. It was the spirit, the ancient voice that had been calling to him since the moment he entered the ruins. "Free us, let us destroy them all." Jonas stood there, torn between the fear and the knowledge of what he had to do. He could sacrifice the team, escape, and live, or he could risk everything, risk his life, his sanity, to stop the ritual before it was too late. The portal opened wider, the very air trembling with the forces beyond. The beasts were closing in, and Jonas knew deep down that the decision he made here would decide the fate of not just him, but the entire world. The air in the chamber grew thick with a palpable, unnatural energy, as if the very fabric of reality itself was beginning to warp. Jonas could feel the weight of it pressing against his chest, heavy like an unseen hand around his heart. The portal, the rift that had been slowly tearing open for what felt like an eternity, now stood before him, an immense, swirling vortex of light and shadow. It hung suspended in the center of the ancient ruins, its edges fracturing the very air around it, pulsing with a dark, chaotic rhythm. The creatures that had once been human now stood at the periphery of the chamber, their forms quivering in anticipation. Their eyes, glowing with an unnatural intensity, were fixed on the portal, drawn to it like moths to a flame. The spirits, too, had gathered, their voices rising in a cacophony of ancient, desperate cries. It was as if they were all bound to this moment, to the ritual that was unfolding before them. A ritual that would unlock the gateway to another world, a world that had been sealed off for centuries, a world that no mortal soul was ever meant to see. Jonas's breath came in shallow gasps as he stared at the portal, the weight of his responsibility pressing down on him like a crushing wave. The ruins had come alive in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. They were no longer just a place of discovery. They were a living entity, an ancient, malevolent force that had been lying dormant for millennia, waiting for this moment. He had always known there was something wrong about this place. The whispers, the creatures, the mummies, they were all part of a much larger design. A design that had been set in motion long before he ever set foot in this cursed ruin. But now, standing at the precipice of the unknown, Jonas realized that the truth was far darker than anything he had ever imagined. The portal itself was an abomination. It defied all natural laws, its edges shimmering with an eerie, unnatural light. The air around it crackled with dark energy, and Jonas could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. The wind inside the chamber howled, but it wasn't the wind that terrified him. It was the voices, the whispers of the spirits that grew louder with every passing second. They were calling to him, beckoning him to step closer, to embrace the forbidden knowledge that lay beyond the rift. But as he stepped forward, something inside him screamed for him to turn back. He had come to this place seeking answers, seeking to understand the ancient civilization that had once flourished here. But now he saw the truth for what it was, a dark, twisted truth that had been buried for a reason. The knowledge they had sought to uncover was not meant for mortal minds. It was a knowledge that, once unleashed, would tear the world apart. The ritual had reached its peak. The portal was wide open now, its swirling vortex beckoning him forward. But Jonas didn't move. He couldn't. He had come so far, but now, in this moment, he understood the true cost of their discovery. There was no going back. "Stop it," Jonas whispered to himself, his voice hoarse with the weight of his realization. He had to stop it. He had to destroy the ruins before the portal could open fully, before whatever lay beyond could pour through and consume everything in its path. But as the words left his mouth, the weight of his decision settled in. He couldn't just destroy the ruins. He couldn't just erase the knowledge they had uncovered. If he did, he would be condemning humanity to ignorance, to a life lived in the shadow of what could have been. The ancient civilization, with all its knowledge and power, could hold the key to unlocking the mysteries of the universe. It could hold the answers to questions that had plagued mankind for millennia. But what if the cost was too high? What if, in unleashing this knowledge, they were opening a door to something that was beyond their understanding? What if they were unleashing a horror that would consume not just them, but the entire world? Jonas's mind raced as he grappled with the impossible choice before him. Destroy the ruins and seal the portal, keeping the forbidden knowledge buried forever, or allow the ritual to complete and risk unleashing the horrors that lay beyond. His heart pounded in his chest as he thought of the team, of the lives that had already been lost, of the price they had paid to uncover this ancient, terrible truth. And then the creatures moved. The massive, twisted beasts that had once been human surged forward, their eyes glowing with an insatiable hunger. Their growls echoed through the chamber, their claws scraping against the stone floor as they closed in on Jonas. But it wasn't just the creatures. It was the spirits too, the restless souls that had been bound to the ruins for centuries, waiting for the moment when the portal would finally open. They were no longer content to simply watch. They were hungry, desperate to break free of the curse that had held them prisoner for so long. Jonas stepped back, his mind spinning, his thoughts clouded by fear and confusion. The walls of the chamber seemed to close in around him as the weight of his decision pressed down on him, suffocating him. He had to act. He couldn't wait any longer. The portal was open. The beasts were closing in. The spirits were howling, their voices rising in a crescendo of madness. But as he turned to flee, a voice stopped him. It was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. Jonas. The voice was familiar. It was the voice of Dr. Parker. Jonas froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned slowly, his eyes searching the room for her. She was standing at the far end of the chamber, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with fear. But it wasn't just fear that he saw in her gaze. There was something else, something darker. "What have we done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Jonas's stomach turned. He knew what she meant. They had uncovered something they were never meant to find. They had opened a door to something that was beyond their understanding, something that was now spilling into their world. And now they were all trapped. He turned back to the portal, his eyes locked on the swirling vortex of light and shadow. The creatures were closing in on him, their monstrous forms blocking his escape. The spirits were swirling around him, their voices rising in a maddening chorus. And Jonas knew with a sickening certainty that there was no way out. This was the moment, the choice. If he destroyed the ruins, he would condemn humanity to live in ignorance, never knowing the truth of what had once been. But if he allowed the ritual to complete, he would unleash a darkness so profound, so all-consuming, that nothing would survive. The weight of the decision pressed down on him like a crushing stone. He had come to this place seeking answers, seeking the truth. But now, standing at the threshold of the unknown, Jonas realized that some truths were better left buried. The ritual was complete, and the horrors beyond the portal were about to be unleashed. As Jonas stood there, trapped in the depths of the ruins, surrounded by the creatures and spirits that had been awakened by their reckless pursuit of knowledge, he thought of the journey that had brought him here. He thought of the lives lost, of the terror that had unfolded before him, and of the terrible consequences of unearthing something humanity was never meant to find. He had made his choice, and in that moment he understood the price of knowledge. The world would never be the same. The ruins trembled beneath Jonah's feet, the air vibrating with an energy so dark, so potent, it felt as though the very earth beneath him was alive. The creatures, the grotesque, twisted half-beasts that had once been human, surrounded him, their glowing eyes filled with a feral hunger that transcended death itself. Their claws scraped against the stone floor, sharp and menacing, while the spirits howled around him, their voices a maddening chorus that echoed through the chamber like 1,000 souls crying out in agony. Jonas had never experienced terror like this. Not in the deserts of Iraq, not in the caves of Afghanistan. This was something deeper, more primal, something that sank into the bones and clawed at the very soul. The portal loomed ahead of him, its swirling vortex of light and shadow threatening to tear the fabric of reality apart. The wind howled through the chamber, but it wasn't the wind. It was the sound of the rift itself, a banshee's wail, pulling everything into its deadly embrace. The air was thick with the scent of decay and death, as if the portal was slowly eroding the world itself. His team was scattered, their faces pale with fear, their bodies trembling as the creatures closed in. Riley, his expression wild with panic, fired his weapon at the nearest beast, but the bullets bounced harmlessly off its thick, leathery hide. Dr. Parker was backing away, her eyes wide with disbelief, clutching the rifle to her chest like a fragile shield. But Jonas knew it was useless. Guns, firepower, none of it mattered in this place. They were nothing against the ancient darkness that had been unleashed. Jonas, Riley screamed, his voice desperate. "We need to get out of here." But Jonas knew there was no way out. Not now. Not with the portal so close, its pull growing stronger by the second. The creatures, the spirits, they were merely the beginning. The real danger lay beyond the rift, in the ancient civilization that had created the portal, the civilization that had sealed itself away for centuries, waiting for this moment. Jonah's heart pounded as he scanned the chamber. The altar, the heart of the ruins, pulsed with dark energy, its surface glowing with a malevolent light. The symbols etched into the stone walls seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light, their meaning still a mystery. But Jonas felt the presence of something far older than the creatures, something far more terrifying. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, throwing Jonas to the floor. The ceiling above cracked, dust and debris raining down on them as the very ruins seemed to collapse under the weight of the ritual. The rift in the air widened, growing larger, its edges jagged and bleeding with a sickly light. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Jonas saw it, the true horror. The creatures weren't the true evil. The true evil lay in the ruins themselves. The ancient civilization that had built this place, these twisted, horrific beings that were now lurking in the shadows, were not the product of dark rituals gone wrong. They were the result of the civilization's own thirst for immortality. Jonah's breath caught in his throat as he pieced together the fragments of the truth. The ancient leaders of this civilization, once human, once mortal, had sought to transcend death itself. They had used the portal not to explore other worlds, but to escape the limitations of their own bodies, to cheat death, to become something else, something not quite human, something monstrous. And in their pursuit of immortality, they had created the very horrors that now hunted Jonas and his team. The beasts, the spirits, They were not just victims of the curse. They were the remnants of those who had fallen prey to their own ambitions, their own lust for power. Jonas felt his stomach turn as he realized the full extent of the horror. These creatures, these beings had once been human. They had been twisted by their own hands, corrupted by their insatiable desire for eternal life. And now they were bound to the ruins, guarding the secrets that had once led to their downfall, trapped in a never-ending cycle of suffering and hunger. Jonah's doctor, Parker's voice trembled, snapping him from his thoughts. "We can't fight them. We can't." She didn't finish her sentence. The creature nearest them lunged, its jaws snapping shut just inches from her face. Jonas acted on instinct, grabbing Dr. Parker and pulling her out of the way, his heart hammering in his chest. They had no time. The portal was opening wider, its pull becoming irresistible, and the creatures were closing in on them faster than they could react. The world around him seemed to slow, every movement exaggerated, every breath painfully slow. Jonas felt the weight of the situation press in on him, the realization of what was happening sinking into his bones. He couldn't stop the ritual. He couldn't close the portal, not on his own. But there was something he could do. The energy in the chamber grew stronger, the pressure building, the air thick with the oppressive weight of the ruins. Jonas stumbled forward toward the altar, his eyes fixed on the dark energy pulsating from the core. The creatures were now circling, waiting for their chance to strike, but Jonas knew that he had no choice. If he didn't act now, if he didn't make the ultimate sacrifice, the horrors of this world would be unleashed and there would be no stopping them. "Jonas!" Grayson's voice echoed through the chamber, desperate. "Get away from there." But Jonas didn't stop. He could feel it now, the pull of the portal, the weight of the decision that lay ahead. He had come here for knowledge, for answers. But now, he understood the truth. The knowledge they had uncovered, the forbidden knowledge, it was never meant for humanity. It was a curse, a poison that had been sealed away for a reason. And if he didn't stop it, if he didn't destroy the ruins and close the portal, the world as they knew it would be consumed by the darkness that had been waiting beneath the ice. Jonas reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the altar, the cold, unnatural energy seeping into his skin. The symbols on the altar burned with a sickly glow. And for a moment Jonas saw them, not as they were but as they had been, an ancient civilization, powerful and proud, on the verge of a great breakthrough. But their breakthrough had come at a cost, and the cost had been their humanity. His breath came in ragged gasps, his mind racing as the choice before him became clear. He could destroy the ruins, seal the portal, and end this nightmare. But it would cost him everything. His life, his freedom, his future. Or he could leave the portal open, let the creatures escape, let the horrors of another dimension spill into their world, and let the ancient knowledge of the civilization be used by forces far worse than the monsters they had faced. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, the cold stone beneath his hands growing colder, the energy around him pulsing with an irresistible pull. He knew what he had to do. With one final, desperate breath, Jonas made his decision. He stepped forward, his fingers tightening on the altar, and in that moment he felt the energy surge through him, filling him with a force so powerful it threatened to tear him apart. The air crackled, the light from the portal blinding, and Jonas felt his body begin to disintegrate, his very being pulled into the void. But he didn't care. He didn't care because he knew deep down that he had done the right thing. He had sealed the portal, he had stopped the ritual, and for a fleeting moment, as the world around him began to fade, he felt peace. He had saved humanity from the horrors that lay beyond the ice, And with that peace, Jonah's wells was no more. The portal closed, the ruins crumbled, and the world was left with nothing but the cold silence of the forgotten civilization, its secrets sealed away once again. But for Jonah's, there would be no return. Only the endless, eternal darkness of the void. The silence of the Arctic was unlike any silence Jonah's had ever known. It was suffocating, oppressive, and cold in a way that seemed to settle into the bones. The wind howled across the barren landscape, biting through his layers of clothing, but Jonah's barely noticed the cold. He was numb to everything now, physically, emotionally, mentally. He had come out of the ruins, yes, but had he truly escaped? Or had he simply been thrust back into a world that was somehow more broken, more haunted than the one he had left behind? He stood on the frozen wasteland, his breath coming in shallow gasps, his eyes scanning the empty horizon. The sky above was a dull gray, the sun nowhere to be seen. The base was in ruins, the shattered remains of his team scattered across the icy expanse. The creatures, those twisted, nightmarish things, were gone, but Jonah's couldn't shake the feeling that something worse had replaced them. The spirits, too, had vanished with the closing of the portal, but their cries, their whispers, still echoed in his mind. The remnants of their presence clung to him like a second skin, their hunger, their desperate yearning still fresh in his thoughts. Jonas tried to breathe, to steady himself, but the weight of it all crushed him. He was alone. He had survived, but at what cost? His hands shook as he clutched the rifle in his grip, though he wasn't sure why he still held it. The monsters had been vanquished, the spirits had been released, or had they? No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the nagging doubt that lingered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. The ruins were gone, collapsed into the ice, erased from the world. The structures that had once held the key to untold knowledge, to power beyond comprehension, were now nothing more than a memory. Yet Jonas knew deep in his gut that the memory wasn't all that remained. Something else was still out there, something darker, something that had not been fully destroyed. He could feel it in his bones. Jonas made his way back to the surface station, the heavy boots crunching through the snow. The silence pressed against him, thick and suffocating. He hadn't been able to say goodbye. He hadn't been able to mourn the others, Riley, Doctor, Parker, Grayson, because in the end they were all just victims of a larger, more insidious force. A force that had been waiting, patient and relentless beneath the ice. And no matter how far Jonas walked, no matter how far he distanced himself from the ruins, he could still feel the pull of that force, deep beneath the earth. The research station seemed like a distant dream. He had returned to it, as if stepping out of the pages of a nightmare, but it was no longer the same place. The walls, once a safe haven, now felt like a prison. Jonas couldn't shake the sensation that he was being watched. Every creak of the station, every gust of wind against the windows, sent a shiver down his spine. He hadn't slept properly in days, hadn't been able to eat without the taste of ash in his mouth. His thoughts kept returning to the portal, to the beasts, to the spirits that had clawed their way out of the ice. Had he really destroyed them? Or had he simply sealed them away for a time, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon them? He spent his days in a haze, wandering the station, his mind haunted by the memories of what he had seen. He couldn't look at the horizon without seeing the twisted, contorted faces of the mummies. He couldn't close his eyes without hearing the whispered calls of the spirits, their voices desperate and yearning. They had wanted freedom, and in releasing them, Jonas had set something far worse loose than he could ever have anticipated. The spirits, once trapped within the ice, were gone, yes, but were they truly freed? Or had they simply been released from one prison only to move into another? Jonas wasn't sure, but the unease that settled in his chest every time the wind howled through the station was enough to make him question his own sanity. The creatures had been destroyed, or so he thought. But what if, in the process of sealing the portal, he had only opened the door to something even more terrifying? He hadn't been the first to discover the ruins after all. There had been others who had come before him and never returned. What had happened to them? Were they still out there, trapped, waiting for someone to find them? Jonas couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the ruins hadn't been completely obliterated. The ice might have swallowed them, but something remained, hidden deep beneath the surface, waiting to resurface when the time was right. He had learned in the darkest hours of the ruins that some things were meant to stay buried. But the world had a way of digging up the past. It always did. Jonas began to distance himself from the others in the station. They had tried to talk to him, to help him, but he couldn't bring himself to tell them the truth. What truth was there to tell? He had survived. He had made it out of the ruins, but there was no relief, no peace. Every night when he closed his eyes, the images of the beasts, the mummies, the spirits flooded his mind. And the more he thought about it, the more the doubt gnawed at him. Had the ruins really been destroyed? Was the portal truly sealed, or had it only been pushed back, buried beneath the ice once more, waiting to be uncovered again? Jonas couldn't answer those questions. He couldn't answer any of them. All he knew was that the horrors he had witnessed had left scars on his soul, scars that would never heal. And the worst part was that he couldn't escape them. No matter how far he ran, no matter how much time passed, the ruins would always be there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the next unwitting soul to stumble upon them. As the days passed, Jonas began to unravel. The isolation of the station, the crushing weight of the knowledge he carried, began to take its toll. The others in the station had no idea what he had seen, what he had done. They had no idea what he had unleashed, but Jonas knew, and he could feel the darkness stirring beneath the surface of the world, waiting for the right moment to rise again. The last remnants of the ancient civilization, their monstrous creations, their twisted rituals, their cursed knowledge, had not been erased. They were only lying in wait, and sooner or later someone would find them. The full weight of that realization crashed over Jonas as he stood alone on the icy plains, staring out into the endless white expanse. The ruins were gone, yes. The portal was closed for now. But the truth of what he had uncovered, of what had been awakened, would never be forgotten. He had done what he could, but he knew deep in his bones that the horrors of the ice would never truly be gone. There would always be another soul to awaken the curse, another soul to disturb the ancient sleep. And the world would never be the same. Years had passed since the ice had swallowed the ruins, and the world had moved on. Time had dulled the memory of the horrors Jonas had uncovered beneath the ice, the world resuming its steady march forward, leaving behind the terrible remnants of an ancient civilization that had once ruled and now lay forgotten. But Jonas knew better than most that some things were never truly forgotten. They only waited, biding their time, patient and deadly. He sat alone in his small cabin in the Scottish Highlands, the quiet of the countryside a stark contrast to the chaos of the ruins. The hills rolled peacefully beneath the mist, the wind whispering through the trees. But despite the serenity around him, Jonas could never escape the feeling that the darkness still lingered, watching from the shadows. The whispers had not stopped. They still echoed in his mind, haunting him. No matter how far he had run, the horrors of the ice had followed. The nightmares had only grown worse. At night, when the world was still, Jonas could hear the cries of the spirits, their voices a cacophony of anguish and desperation. He could see their twisted faces in the shadows, their glowing eyes staring at him, pleading with him to release them once more. The creatures, those monstrous half-human beasts, still lurked in his dreams, their claws scraping against his mind, relentless and unforgiving. He had hoped in the beginning that the nightmares would fade, that the memory of the portal, the beasts, and the spirits would dissolve like smoke on the wind, but they never did. And now the familiar weight of dread pressed on his chest once more, suffocating him. He knew something was coming. He could feel it. His hand trembled as he reached for the letter that had arrived that morning. It had no return address, only a simple message written in cold, sterile handwriting. New expedition. Ruins in Alaska, under the guise of peace. We need you. The words sent a chill down his spine, a reminder of everything he had tried to bury. He had spent years running from the truth, from the knowledge he had uncovered. But now, someone else was going to make the same mistakes. A new team, a new mission, sent to the ruins that had cost him everything. He had been the one to survive, the one to walk away, but the darkness had never left him. And now it was reaching out again, dragging another group of unwitting souls toward the same fate. Jonas had been offered the chance to forget. A new life, a quiet life, far away from the horrors of the ruins. But he knew now that there was no escaping it. The ruins were not just a place. They were a curse, a cycle, a hunger that could never be sated. The letter crinkled in his hands as his fingers tightened around it. He knew what he had to do. He had to go back. He had to stop them before it was too late. The day Jonas arrived at the new research facility in Alaska, it felt as though the world had shifted beneath him. The landscape was as bleak as ever, endless stretches of white, the jagged peaks of the mountains rising like silent sentinels in the distance. The cold bit at his skin, but it wasn't the cold that unnerved him. It was the familiarity. It was the same oppressive silence he had felt the first time he had entered the ruins. The air was thick with something else now, something he couldn't explain, but that had been with him since the moment he left the ruins. The sense that the darkness had never truly been sealed away. The new team, a mix of scientists, military personnel, and historians, greeted him with a mix of curiosity and caution. They had heard the stories, the whispers of the previous expedition that had vanished without a trace. They had been told that Jonas was the only survivor, the only one to make it out alive. But they didn't know the full truth. They didn't know that Jonas was no hero. He was just the last man standing in a battle he could never win. As he entered the briefing room, the air was thick with tension. The leaders of the expedition, a group of ambitious, naive individuals who believed they could control what had been unleashed beneath the ice, sat at the table. They talked of peace, of diplomacy, of establishing communication with whatever had once lived in the ruins. They spoke of exploring the forgotten civilization, unlocking its secrets, and perhaps even learning from it. But Jonas knew better. He knew that the ruins were never meant to be discovered. He knew that the portal they had unlocked was not a gateway to knowledge, but to something far worse. And now, the cycle was about to repeat itself. As the team made their plans, Jonas sat in silence, his mind racing. The familiar unease gnawed at him, the feeling that he was being watched, that the eyes of the creatures and spirits were upon him once more. He wanted to scream, to warn them, but he knew it would do no good. They were determined. They believed they could control what they didn't understand. He couldn't stop them, not anymore. But there was one thing Jonas could do. He could return to the ruins. He could find the heart of the portal and seal it once and for all. He could break the cycle, or at least that's what he told himself. Deep down, a part of him wondered if the cycle had already begun again, if he was merely a pawn in a game that had been going on for centuries. He had no way of knowing, but he would not let this new group suffer the same fate he had. The expedition moved forward, their equipment ready, their minds filled with ambition and naivety. As they trekked through the ice toward the ruins, Jonas could feel the pull of the place. It was as though the land itself was calling to him, drawing him back to where it all began. His heart hammered in his chest as they neared the entrance to the cave system, the ruins lying just beyond. This time, they would not escape. They would not understand. He had to stop them. He had to make sure the portal was sealed. He had to make sure they never unlocked what was hidden beneath the ice. But as Jonas entered the ruins once more, as he stepped into the chamber where the portal had once been, he realized the horrifying truth. The ruins had never been destroyed. The portal had never been sealed. It was just waiting patiently for the next group to come along to awaken the curse once more. The spirits, the creatures, the ancient civilization, they were all still there, waiting for someone to make the same mistakes. And Jonas knew with sickening certainty that this would never end. The cycle would never break. As the new team ventured deeper into the ruins, their voices growing fainter in the distance, Jonas couldn't help but feel a cold smile tug at the corners of his lips. He had tried to escape, but the truth was there was no escape. The ruins had claimed him, and they would claim the next group too. The horrors of the ice were far from over, and the cycle would begin again. The final words echoed in his mind as he turned and walked away from the entrance, the cold wind howling around him. He had done what he could, but the knowledge, the forbidden knowledge, was never meant to be unearthed. It was a curse, a dark force that would always find a way to resurface. No matter how many times they sealed it away, no matter how many souls they sacrificed, the cycle would continue. And Jonas Wells, the last man standing, knew the terrifying truth. The horrors of the ruins were never truly gone. They were only waiting for someone else to make the same mistakes he had. As the chilling journey of Jonas Wells comes to an end, the haunting cycle of discovery, corruption, and destruction becomes clear. The ruins beneath the ice, once thought to be buried and forgotten, resurface through his struggles, leading to the awakening of ancient horrors that have long been sealed away. The portal to another dimension, created by a civilization whose thirst for immortality twisted them into grotesque beings, remains the core of this terrifying cycle. Jonas, once a man driven by curiosity and a desire for knowledge, is forced to confront the terrible truth. Some things are meant to stay hidden. The knowledge sought by mankind, once believed to hold the keys to the universe, was, in fact, a curse that would drag the world into darkness. Throughout the story, we see Jonas's evolution from a man seeking answers to someone burdened by the unbearable weight of the truths he uncovers. The final realization that the cycle of horror would never end, because the ruins, the portal, and the dark forces that lay dormant beneath the ice were always waiting to resurface, marks the tragic irony of his journey. He had hoped to stop it. He had hoped to break the curse. But in the end, the horrors that lie beneath the surface of humanity, whether in ancient ruins or in the human heart, are never truly gone. They lie dormant, only waiting for the next unwitting soul to unlock them. The lesson is profound. The The search for forbidden knowledge, unchecked ambition, and the desire to transcend human limitations often come at a steep cost. The ancient civilization that created the ruins in their quest for immortality paid the ultimate price, transforming into the very monsters they sought to escape. In our own lives, there are boundaries that should not be crossed, knowledge that should remain untapped, and power that is better left untouched. Some things are meant to stay buried, and the pursuit of knowledge should always come with an awareness of its potential consequences. In the context of modern life, this story serves as a warning about the dangers of unrestrained ambition, whether in science, technology, or personal pursuits. While knowledge and progress are crucial, there are ethical boundaries that must guide us. The constant race for advancement, without considering the broader implications, can lead to unforeseen consequences, just as Jonah's discovered. It reminds us to tread carefully in our ambitions, to recognize when we are pushing against limits that should not be violated, and to understand the cost of ignoring the wisdom of restraint. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What lessons do you think we can take from Jonah's experience? Do you believe there are boundaries in our own world that should never be crossed? And if so, what are they? Please share your views in the comments below. Let's discuss and learn from each other. And if you enjoyed this tale, make sure to subscribe to Whispers in the Dark to support our channel and keep the terrifying stories coming. Your support gives us the drive to create more chilling content for you.